Erev Tov, everybody. Good evening. It's good to see you. This week's Parsha is Parshat Matot. Of course, this Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh, Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. And so therefore, of course, it has within itself added significance. And of course, it is also the beginning of the 9 days. This week's Parsha is Matot Masei. It's a double Parsha. And in it, we find something which appears to be relatively mundane. And that is the first mitzvah that we have here is the mitzvah, or mitzvot, and the various elements of the mitzvot of nidarim, that vows that a man makes, vows that a woman makes, whether as a spouse or a separate individual vows. And the Torah spends a lengthy period of time talking about vows. And for many people, it doesn't seem too inspirational to them. But I hope tonight we'll be able to discuss the concept of speech. What does it mean? What is speech from a Jewish concept, a Jewish way of looking at the world? So we're only going to read just a little bit here, the 2 or 3 psukim, and at the beginning of Parshat Matot, and it begins with pasuk bet, Perek Lamed, pasuk bet. Vayidaber Moshe el Rashei Hamatot. Rashi tells us that this was important, that Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give a certain sense of respect to the heads of the tribes, Livnei Yisrael lemor, of the Jewish people, saying, Ze hadavar asher tziva Hashem. This is a principal matter which God has commanded us. Now, of course, what is the principal matter here? Ish ki yidor neder l'Hashem. A person who utters a vow to God, oh, he shava shavua, or he utters an oath, le'asor isar al nafsho, to prohibit something upon himself, lo yachel devaro. He may not profane or negate or nullify that word or that that utterance. Okay? That whatever he utters from his mouth, he must fulfill. Those are the psukim we're going to focus on here. First of all, though, we can talk a little bit about the difference between a neder and a shavua from a halachic standpoint, even though it will not directly relate to our discussion this evening. A neder is both of them, of course, involve speech. Both the neder and the shavua involve the use of speech, which is certainly in terms of its sophistication, uniquely human. Now, we know that from a lot of research, biological research, etc., research with whales, research with other animals, that other animals do have various forms of communication. With whales, they talk about it being sophisticated enough that it actually they utter tunes, and the pitch determines things, and the speed determines other intents. But the idea of speech, which is intended to indicate to oneself and to others what should be, that is something which is uniquely human. And the Torah tells us, before I do that, a neder is when I say that I'm not going to do a certain thing. A neder is that regarding something which is there. A neder is a statement that I make. For example, I'm not going to eat a certain thing, or I'm not going to do a certain, perform a certain act. That is the form of neder, which refers to the speaker himself. A shavua is that in which a person says that particular article is prohibited to me. The article is prohibited to me. Even though it may have been permissible before, I'm going to make it prohibited to me. That's the difference between the two. But in either case, the common bond between them is that we use words, and words have significance. So we're going to focus on this phrase, lo yachel devaro. A person should not nullify or abrogate his word. If you say something, you have to try to fulfill your word. And if you don't, for whatever reason, then of course, there are consequences. There are halachic consequences. Kol hayotze mipiv yaseh, everything that he says, he must perform. Now, we know that, of course, we begin each year on Yom Kippur, the first and most poignant, it seems, of the prayers that we offer is Kol Nidre. Of course, I shouldn't say the most poignant. There are many, many highlights and high points in the tefillot of Yom Kippur. But certainly, I think most of us can feel that there's a certain unmatched mystery to the opening of the Aron Kodesh, the removal of the Sifrei Torah, and the utterance of the words of the Chazan, Kol Nidrei Besorei. And then, of course, we go through all of Kol Nidrei. And what is it? What is Kol Nidrei? It's not that I intend to keep kosher. It's not that I'm going to be nicer to everybody. It's any vow or any neder or any shavua that I make in the past year should be batel. It should be voided, and those that I make in the future should be voided. A very mundane, seemingly a very mundane statement that would initiate the most sacred day of the year. But in effect, of course, this reflects the power of speech. It reflects how important speech is. Now, as a matter of fact, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, or in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot said, "Ba'asar ma'amarot nivra olam," that the world was created by 10 utterances of God. Okay? Now the Mishnah goes on and it says, why it's 10 utterances? But they are utterances. It doesn't say 10 deeds, 10 acts, but 10 utterances. And so therefore the uniqueness of, among the many uniquenesses of the Kodesh Baruch Hu is that he had speech and has speech. And he endowed human beings with that speech. How do we know that? Because in Bereshit, beginning of Bereshit, it says, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestowed upon man, breathed within man, Vayipach Ba'apav Nishmat Chayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathed in Adam the breath of life. And then the Torah says, Vayihi Adam lenefesh chaya. Then man became, and here's the key, the Targum Onkelos says, nefesh memala. It is referring to a speaking being. And the interesting thing is we take speech for granted, but Onkelos did not, and the Torah certainly did not. That speech is the most precious element of human existence. And why is that so? It is so because it doesn't mean merely the formulation of sounds in the oral cavity. That's not what we're talking about, or the use of the windpipe or the voice box. It means that words represent concepts and ideas, and we know that because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the power of speech to Adam relatively early, and the power of speech he used to give names to all of the animals of the world. And Rashi tells us there that it means to say that he understood the essence of each animal and then created a name for that animal that expresses that animal's particular unique quality. So our ability to speak is, again, not just the formulation of words, but words are symbolic of thoughts, and thoughts lead back to the neshama, back to the soul. And that's what unkos means when man became, with Hashem's breathing into him, man became a speaking being. Now, I would like to share with you a statement by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He talks about this concept of speech, as usual, in a very eloquent manner. And he says, for Judaism, speaking is life itself. Speaking is life itself. Of course, the sacredness of the Torah are the words that are there, and then the words that are expressed that come from it. So Rabbi Sachs says that actually in Judaism, speaking is life itself. And he gives an example. He says, a key instance of a performative utterance is a promise. When a person makes a promise, in this case, whether it's a neder or whether it's a shavua, or a promise between one individual and another that something is intended to come about. So that, he says, this is an example of an utterance of a performative utterance. He says, when I promise you that I will do something, I am creating something that did not exist before, namely an obligation. When I say to you, I'll see you, however, again, mundane or simple it is, if I say, I'll see you tomorrow at Minyan, so I've created a certain degree of obligation. Or tomorrow we'll meet to purchase for lunch or whatever it is. In doing that, I have created an obligation on myself in the real sense of a shavua or of a neder, of a vow of one sort or another, or a promise. Now, Rabbi Sachs goes a step further, and he says a mutual promise, meaning to say, Reuven makes a promise for Shimon, Shimon then reciprocates and utters a promise based upon Reuven's promise. He utters it to Reuven. That, says Rabbi Sachs, is called a covenant. Now, the word covenant, it comes from two Latin words, co, vinant. Co means together. Vinant, we shall go. Together we go. So in Hebrew, it's brit. But the idea is that when two people engage in an agreement in which their mutual needs are either satisfied or the intention is that they are to be satisfied, that is a certain form of covenant between them. And Rabbi Sachs says, of course, the supreme element of promise is found at Har Sinai, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu established the covenant with all of Klal Yisrael. Now, another great man by the name of Sachs, with the last, I don't believe that the two of them are necessarily related, but Rav Menachem Sachs, who was one of the founders of the ATT, who himself was a brilliant Torah scholar and who lived in Chicago for many years of his life. He says, Lo yachel devaro, those words in the pasuk, that a person should not profane his words, that everything that he does, that he utters, he fulfill. He says, we should never take words too lightly. It becomes a tangible element in the world among people who are serious. Among people who aren't serious at all, so words mean nothing. But to people to whom words mean a great deal, and to the Jewish people, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says, that words to the Jewish people, they are our essence. So he says, it becomes tangible, says Rabbi Menachem Sach. Litkayem ad sheyimtza et tikuno, until those words are binding on us, until they are fulfilled, or sometimes they have to be retracted. And there is, of course, a process for retraction of oaths, of nedarim, etc. We go through that very often when we do hatarat nedarim around Rosh Hashanah. Notice here you have two such meaningful, powerful holidays. Both of them are tied inextricably to the idea of speech and how we may never misuse speech. Now, David HaMelech, and I've mentioned this particular parak more than once, but it's so powerful. Parak Chet of Tehillim is worth going over at least once a month because it has within it the essence of the God-man relationship and the essence of what we are as human beings. And once again, we find speech is a powerful element in it. Now, in the very beginning of the parak, David HaMelech says, "Mi pi olalim v'yonkim yisad to'os," that from the mouths of babes you have established strength. Of course, this is a famous phrase that we use in modern in our modern English usage. Whenever we hear a child has said something that is brilliant, even though they themselves may not even be aware of it, but so we say from the mouths of babes. That's taken from Parak Chet, the 8th parak of Tehillim, worth going over at least once a month. Mipi olalim v'yonkim yisad. You, through the mouths of children, you have established strength. And Rabbeinu Ibn Ezra says on that pasuk, we don't always realize the awesome nature of a child learning speech. When a child learns not only a vocabulary, but the application of that vocabulary to new situations, that's speech. That's speech without being taught. And so Ibn Ezra says this idea of toddlers, in this case, he says, Olim V'yonkim means young children, but especially toddlers, children at a time when speech appears to be beginning to emerge within this young, inquisitive child. And Ibn Ezra says that when a child begins to speak and you hear that child speak, that's the neshama which is coming into maturity within the child. Why? Because speech is the essence of what separates us from all of other of Hashem's creations, means a speech in which we can create, we can formulate, we can apply to different situations. So he says that is indicative of the emerging neshama within the child. It's one of the reasons I've always advocated speaking Hebrew to the child. Rashi mentions it, of course, also on the first parak of Kriya Shema, in Parshat Vayetchanan, he mentions it, of course, that the child should be taught Lashon HaKodesh, but that a child, and that's the magnificence of children growing up in the land of Israel, where they learn to speak at the time that their neshama is emerging. They're saying the very words of the prophets. They're saying the words uttered, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, any of the words which they're learning at that young age, even if it's not exactly those words, but it's other words, that in itself it adds to the neshama's growth and the ability to prosper within the person. So that's Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra ties speech to the emergence of the neshama. But later on in the parak, David HaMelech says, he looks up at the sky at night. And you know, Chazal tell us that David HaMelech had a harp that he placed next to his bed in the window. And then every night in Yerushalayim, there was a constant wind, probably still is, a constant wind, which blew into his window and played on the strings of the harp. And David HaMelech would get up each night at midnight, roughly, and that's when he did his composition of many of the Tehillim that are a part of Sefer Tehillim. Now, we should also remember that the Chazal tell us that there are really 10 authors that we find in the book of Tehillim. And David HaMelech not only was prominent among the authors, but he was really the, shall we say, the editor who arranged the Tehillim themselves. But in this case, David HaMelech writes, he says, Ma enosh ki tizkaren, uven adam ki tifkeden. What is man? He asks the most essential philosophical question person can ask. What is man? That God should take note of him. We are a speck of a speck. We're a speck in a city, which is a speck on the earth, which is a speck in the solar system, which is but a speck in our galaxy, and that galaxy itself is but a speck within the universe. So what does God care? And David answers. He says that we as human beings, here's what we are. We are just a touch below the angel. We are capable of godlike activity. And what makes us capable of godlike activity? The ability to formulate in our minds words that represent the powerful concepts which represent the meaning of life. And so therefore, that's what he says. And the Malbim, the great 19th century thinker of Eastern Europe, among many, many, many great thinkers, he says that the Rishonim, the early commentators probably around 1,000 years ago, stated a principle that there are 4 elements of beings on earth. One is domain. Domain means it is absolutely silent, doesn't move, doesn't want stone. And then there's tzomeach. The next level of creation are those elements which in fact are capable of growth. They're organisms that are capable of growth, and in fact they do. They are created, they're born, they're created, they grow, they die. That's tzomeach. Plant life would be an example of that. Trees, although some of them can live to 2,000 or 3,000 years, but nevertheless, at some point, the tree dies. And then there is chai. Chai are animals that are not attached to the ground. They are mammals, they are reptiles, they are all kinds of animals that move, everything from let's say a crocodile to an elephant. And then that's the third type of creation that exists in our world. And the last is medaber. Those who think, who speak. Those who speak. Now, the idea of those who speak can be seen in Hebrew in one of 2 ways. Either medaber chai or chai medaber. Chai would describe the third element on the chain of sophistication, going from the inanimate to the animate, but the plant life, then animals, then medaber. So it could be chai. Man is a step beyond the normal chai. We are much more sophisticated. Now, I'll tell you a story. When I was the first time I ever went to a university class, the first class I ever went to was at Loyola University, and I really had a good experience at Loyola. Very good experience, intellectually, socially, in many ways. So, however, we were sitting as many. I was taking a psychology, I think a sociology course. It was an elective, a 100 level course, so I was allowed to take it. And we were in a lecture room, a couple of hundred people in the room. We're sitting waiting for the man to come down. The professor comes down. He, it was the summer, so he was dressed extremely casually and smoking a cigarette. In those days, that's what you could do. And his first words were, "Man is a social animal. Man is a social animal." Those are the first words I heard in college. And at that point, I realized that my worldview and his worldview were very different, because to him, man is an animal and he has traits that make him social. And I, at that point in my life, from all of my teachers and from the Torah, I knew that man is not just an animal. Man is beyond that. Man is a medaber. Man may be chai. He may be an animal because we have animal traits that allow us to function on this earth. But man, in the end, is still a medaber. As Onkelos says, man is capable of intellect, speech, conceptualization, things which no other animals have. And then I read the Malbim on this parak, not then, many years later. The Malbim says, don't see us as a chai medaber. We should not look at ourselves as animals which have the power of speech, but rather medaber chai. We are speakers. That is our essence. We are those who are capable of conceptualizing, people who, through the power of intellect, create speech. That's what makes us godlike. With 10 basara mamarim, with 10 utterances, God created the world. God predated the world, and God uttered. God had speech, whatever that means for God. And he endowed human beings with the power of speech. And so we should see ourselves, says the Malbim, as a medaber, not as a chai, not as an animal, but a medaber. We're a different species completely. And the Malbim says from this parak, we're to understand that it's not that because David, he understands David HaMelech's query there when he asks, what is man? Are we just animals that are more sophisticated? Or, he says, are we, in essence, are we really that which is spiritual, but we have qualities that allow us to function on this world? And so therefore the Malbim says that we have to see ourselves as a medaber chai. We should see ourselves as speakers, meaning to say those who conceptualize, those who can abstract things, and not just a sophisticated animal. And now I just want to conclude with two incidents. One of 35 years ago, 45 years ago. I went to Masada. First time I ever went to Israel. I climbed Masada. Actually, it was probably around this very date. And I might have been a speaker, but my intellect was not well enough developed for me to realize in the middle of the summer, you don't go at to climb Masada at 10 o'clock in the morning. But be that as it may, I somehow managed to get up there. And who gets up there, right there with me? The American Maccabeah team, which, they're young, strong people. They took the cable car. I did not. But nevertheless, we were all standing out. Anybody who's been to Masada knows that is a magnificent view. You can see the Dead Sea below. You have all of the earth tone colors that are there and the sun shining down on them. And you're, of course, quite high elevated, a magnificent sight. And I was thinking, Marabu Ma'asecha Hashem. I see God's creation here. And our American Jewish kids lack the ability to do that. What they would say is they would utter profanities, not to be profanities. Those are the only tools that they had to express awe. They weren't angry, and they didn't mean to be disrespectful, but they uttered four-letter words that people who are not very sophisticated utter when they're angry. And then I realized that they didn't have the tools. The Torah gives us the tools to live to our full potential. The second story is one which occurred within the last month or two. Some of you may well know, probably many of you know, that the Supreme Court, of course, renders its decisions in June, in most cases in June, certainly the landmark decisions. And one of them was of a young girl who did not make the cheerleading team at a public school. And she was, to say the least, a bit distraught, very angry, very distraught and upset. And she sent a text to her friends uttering 4-letter words, just terrible. I don't even want to even intimate what it was, but you can imagine blank the school, blank the program, blank the teachers, blank this, blank that. She also has the power of speech. She also was able to communicate, but instead of being able to communicate in a sublime way, she could only communicate in a vulgar way, sadly. A misuse of speech, a profaning of that which makes us godlike. And of course, the Supreme Court ruled that in a country like this, the school, which represents the government, has no right to censor. By the way, that's probably correct, so that all of us can live with freedom of speech, but that doesn't make it right. Somebody should have taken herself. One of her parents should have said, this cannot be. This cannot be, not for my child, not with that use. But on the other hand, the government itself cannot stop us. So from uttering, with the exception of certain threatening forms of speech, we can say and speak whatever we'd like. So let us remember, I think the most important element is David HaMelech's question of what is our essence? Are we a chai medaber? Are we animals that are more sophisticated? Or are we medaber? Are we in essence godlike? Because God uttered the words to create the world, and God gave us that power to use those words, that we are medaber chai. And when we look at ourselves that way, then we begin to value not only our speech, but to value every element of the life which God has given us, so that we can live to our full potential. So I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos. Chodesh Tov. It's, of course, Chodesh Av is coming upon us, and the 9 days are coming upon us. But nevertheless, I wish each and every person a Chodesh Tov and a meaningful year. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Thank you. Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Good
Have a good
Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.